Eddie Murphy's shorts are doing overtime, but he's about to meet one lady that's not for conquering. Comedy in our film Boomerang in 20 minutes.
Major accident. Train derailment.
Reliving the nightmare.
What do you think you could possibly do in 2 minutes that the fire brigade couldn't do in 4 or 5 minutes?
Get it back to the woods!
Wasn't that simple? I saw 3 kids on the road, and I realised what they'd done. I just wanted to save their lives.
Hold on!
Not be a hero.
No.
Backups called to account, Wednesday 9:30 on BBC One.
Some of the country's most difficult cases to crack, but more than 1 in 4 is solved by a Crime Watch viewer. This month, a 15-year hunt for a serial rapist, possibly the biggest investigation this decade. Crime Watch has all the details, but we need your help to find him. And heroism in the face of an armed robbery in Preston. Several vehicles were involved. Someone must know the men responsible. That's Crime Watch UK on Tuesday, BBC One at 10.
The news and sport now on BBC One with Michael Burke and Rob Bonnet.
The government is to make so-called sleaze a crime. A new offence of corruption in public life will merit up to 7 years in jail. The baby left crawling near a road by a car thief. And the horse they used to call Benny the Drip wins the closest derby for years.
On the line, Benny the Drip is
Good evening. The government will announce on Monday that it's drawing up legislation to stop so-called sleaze. It'll create a new crime of corruption in public life and target people like MPs and judges who don't come under existing laws on corrupt practices. It's thought the new laws will provide for a maximum penalty of 7 years in jail. Our political correspondent Nick Jones reports.
Cleaning up British political life was one of the issues on which Tony Blair fought the election. Labour's manifesto included a promise to end what it called the crisis of confidence caused by sleaze and the action of Conservative MPs taking cash for asking parliamentary questions. Jack Straw, the Home Secretary, is expected to make the announcement on Monday, and work will begin preparing new laws which could come into force within 2 years. What's likely to be known as the Anti-Sleaze Bill would create a new offence of corruption, like bribery, and would be targeted specifically at people in public life, like MPs and judges, who aren't covered by the existing laws on corrupt practices. There'd be a new maximum penalty of 7 years imprisonment for an MP, for example, who accepted bribes. Lord Nolan, who's been reviewing standards in public life, is due next month to be publishing a new report on misconduct in local government.
If there, as a matter of priority, building on the work that's been done by my committee, if I can call it that, and by the Law Commission and by the Home Office, I shall be delighted.
The pace of announcements since the election has been unrelenting, and Tony Blair is now beginning to lay out the legislation that will be enacted in his second year in office. The government wants to encourage European moves to combat corruption in public life, and a Home Office minister will tell the Council of Europe on Tuesday of the steps Britain intends to take. Nicholas Jones, BBC News.
A hung parliament looks to be the most likely outcome of Ireland's general election. With counting still underway, the opposition leader, Bertie Ahern, has made gains, but it's not clear whether he'll be able to form a government without the help of independents. Sinn Féin has won its first seat in the Dáil for 40 years. From Dublin, our Ireland correspondent Dennis Murray reports.
Bertie Ahern, Fianna Fáil, 12,175.
The Fianna Fáil leader won his seat easily, though he didn't appear in public as the votes were counted and the results began to flow. His party's made significant gains, but his running mates, the Progressive Democrats, are doing badly. Some counts have concluded, but many more will run into tomorrow afternoon, and that makes the current coalition government hopeful it can still return to office.
At the end of it all, I believe that John Bruton will be elected Taoiseach. And I'm firmly convinced that the Rainbow, plus other supporters, will form the next government in this country.
But if the two coalitions have almost equal numbers of seats, more independents would support Fianna Fáil. I asked a former foreign minister if a new government would mean a different handling of the Northern Ireland peace process.
We stand for peace, we stand for the inclusion of all elements in the community in the north, and we see ourselves as the upholders of the rights of nationalism, as do the British. Mr. Blair and his team see themselves the upholders of the rights of unionists.
Sinn Féin made history, their first MP in modern times, who'll also be the first to take his seat, unlike the party's Northern Ireland MPs, who are abstentionists.
Sinn Féin is totally committed to seeing a peace process in place that has the necessary dynamic to move us all out of conflict. That's our commitment to the electorate, not only in Cavan Monaghan, but throughout the length and breadth of this island.
The present government includes the Labour Party. Its leader won easily, but elsewhere its vote collapsed. And if that means there could be a hung parliament, the current coalition won't be seeking the support of the Sinn Féin member.
As I understand, they have one deputy elected. I hope he comes into the Dáil and makes a forthright pledge in terms of democratic politics. That's what we're all trying to do, get them into democratic politics and away from violence.
There are now 2 Sinn Féin MPs in Northern Ireland, one in the Irish Republic, a new British government and probably a new Irish government. If Fianna Fáil is to secure office, then the political landscape surrounding the peace process will have been transformed in just over a month. Dennis Murray, BBC News, Dublin.
Genetics experts meeting in the United States at a call for a legal ban on research into the cloning of humans. President Bill Clinton ordered them to examine the ethical issues involved after scientists in Britain successfully cloned a sheep. Our Washington correspondent Bridget Kendall reports.
Experiments on sheep in Scotland may have shown it's possible, but successfully cloning Dolly doesn't mean it should happen to humans yet. That's the one thing members of the US National Bioethics Commission, meeting today to finalise their views, agree upon. The idea of cloning humans is still so fraught with risks and difficulties, it's morally unacceptable. So the report they'll send to President Clinton this coming week will recommend a continued ban on federal funding and probably a new law to stop anyone, particularly in the private sector, from trying to clone a child.
The main worry is that individual fertility clinics or the like could be induced by either their own desire to be the first to do something or a wealthy client desiring to reproduce in this fashion, to push ahead and attempt to use this technique. And we think that would be an irresponsible thing to do.
As for cloning experiments on animals like these rhesus monkeys, they can continue, but the Commission sidesteps what to do about human embryo cloning that stops short of creating babies. Anti-abortion activists are up in arms.
The embryonic child has begun, and if what you're going to do to avoid cloning adults is kill that embryonic child, that's abortion.
There's already quite some discontent with this report. Not only does the powerful anti-abortion lobby say the whole idea is morally repugnant, scientists are worried that any new law could be too restrictive. It looks as though cloning is about to become the next moral issue to divide America. Bridget Kendall, BBC News, Washington.
War crimes investigators have found 57 bodies in a mass grave in Croatia. They were found near the village of Lovas in eastern Slavonia, which was formerly controlled by the Serbs. It's thought that most of the victims were elderly civilians who were shot by Serb troops after the fall of eastern Slavonia in 1991. Here, Hertfordshire police say a baby boy who was dumped more than a mile from home after thieves stole his mother's car is lucky to be unharmed. 10-month-old Matthew Hilsden was found by a woman walking her dog. Jackie Rowley reports.
The Hilsdens live on a farm. It's quite secluded. Jennifer Hilsden had just got home. Matthew was asleep in the back of the car, strapped into his seat. She nipped into the house, and when she came out, both the car and her baby had gone. 15 minutes later, a woman out walking her dog found Matthew. He was crawling about by the roadside, the child's seat lying nearby. It's a quiet lane, but there's a busy road not far away.
Matthew was in considerable danger. If he wasn't found so soon, he could have crawled off towards the busy road, the residential road, or in turn crawled into the undergrowth or the fields nearby, where he might not have been found for days.
The Green Maestro was found abandoned about a mile away, together with a red Ford Escort which had been stolen earlier in the day. Mrs. Hilsden says Matthew's experience hasn't hurt him, but she's appalled that anyone could risk a baby's life.
Taking the car, yes, I mean it's dreadful, but you hear about cars being taken all the time. But to actually then sort of put his life in danger is you just can't think why they've done it.
Hertfordshire police are warning parents, however tempting the circumstances, not to leave their children alone in the car. Jackie Rowley, BBC News, Hemel Hempstead.
Prison reformers have said the detention of a 12-year-old girl in an adult jail on the Isle of Man amounts to child abuse. The girl who's accused of damaging property and assaulting a social worker is being held on remand. The National Association for the Care and Resettlement of Offenders said she'd be below the age of criminal responsibility in most European countries. Army engineers have recovered 3 prototypes of the so-called bouncing bomb off the Kent coast. They were discovered yesterday at low tide after lying in the sea for more than 50 years. The bouncing bombs were immortalised in the film The Dam Busters.
With the sun setting on their efforts, the Territorial Army was tonight continuing its struggle to free the last of the 4 prototype bombs. The tide had turned earlier in the day, when only 3 of the devices had been retrieved, leaving the largest still stuck deep in the sand. None of the devices contains explosives, but moving them from their resting place of more than 50 years has not been easy. There was success, though, early this morning, as the Army was able to prize out 3 bombs used in trials for the Dam Busters raid. It's hoped they will eventually be placed in a suitable Kent museum.
I think people have realised that they had been there for 50 years and before long they would be lost to us. They're an important part of our national military history, and we believe, and so do many other people, that they should be on display for people to look at.
It's a long way from the dramatic trials on the Kent coast when the bombs invented by Barnes Wallis were put through their paces before an audience of military officials. The raid itself was later immortalised in the 1950s film The Dam Busters, which captured the spirit of a mission that was an enormous boost to wartime morale. For the son of the inventor of the bouncing bomb, today was a chance to remember just how unconventional his father's concept seemed at the time.
All sorts of corny ideas had come up, and this was just about the corniest to the lot. Well, he just stuck at it and said, right, that's it, Jack, you know, it's going to happen.
In the last hour, the Army managed to prize free the 4-ton device still buried in the beach near Reculver. It has been secured by the engineers, who are hoping to bring it ashore early tomorrow morning. It will be a fitting conclusion to one of the most dramatic chapters in Britain's wartime history. Gary Duffy, BBC News, on the Kent coast.
Now, with news of an American win in the Derby and an Australian fight back at Edgbaston, here's Rob Bonnet.
Yes, one of the Derby's most exciting finishes for years, the 11-to-1 chance. Benny the Dip held off the late challenger's Silver Patriarch to win by a short head at Epsom this afternoon. The American-owned and bred winner supplied jockey Willie Ryan and trainer John Gosden with their first Derby success. The odds-on favourite Entrepreneur, meanwhile, was a disappointing 4th.
An excellent turnout at Epsom that will have delighted supporters of a Saturday derby, with most eyes focused on the odds-on favourite Entrepreneur, expected by all but a brave few to add his name to the long list of 2,000 Guineas winners who've gone on to win the biggest flat race of them all.
And away they go for the derby.
But it wasn't to be. Instead, Entrepreneur will be remembered as just another Derby favourite who promised much, but when it came to the race, produced little. He never threatened the leaders. Indeed, with a furlong remaining, nobody looked like threatening the long-time leader, Benny the Dip.
It's a one-horse race at the moment, but here comes Silver Patriarch. Benny the Dip is just fading in front, and Silver Patriarch is catching him. Silver Patriarch going to get there, I think, on the line. Benny the Dip.
It was one of the closest finishes in Derby history, and for Willie Ryan on Benny the Dip, there was an anxious wait for the result of the photo.
First number 1.
Yes, she won the Derby!
So, triumph for Willie Ryan, who'd only been given the ride this week. His horse had provided an emphatic response to those who taunted him with the nickname Benny the Drip. Bob Ballard, BBC News.
A fighting 108 not out from Australian captain Mark Taylor, his first big score in over 18 months, has given his side a chance of saving the first test against England at Edgbaston. By the close of today's 3rd day, Australia had reduced England's lead to 104 after reaching 256 for 1 in their second innings. England had earlier declared on 478 for 9.
Such was England's dominance over the first 2 days, that their main threat now appeared to be not their opponents, but the grey skies over Edgbaston. Robert Croft soon fell to a lifting ball, which suggested there was still life in the pitch. Shortly after, Mark Elam reached his 50 with a flourish before the declaration duly arrived. The weather interrupted Australia's reply, but failed to dampen high English spirits. That delay and his side's deficit didn't deter Matthew Elliott, who still managed to play with confidence. Even his beleaguered captain Mark Taylor was finding a semblance of form, hoisting Elam for the first 6 of the match. Taylor's half-century was his first in Test cricket since December 1995. Australia had reached 133 when they lost their first wicket. Elliott, on 66, beaten by Croft. But the role reversal from earlier in the match continued. England's bowlers struggling, Australia's batsmen able to capitalise. Taylor's century represented a stubborn effort for his team, as well as a personal triumph which may, at least for now, quieten his critics. With Greg Blewett partnering his captain, Australia's fight back means much more hard work's required if England are to take a series lead. James Helm, BBC News.
Earlier, Australia's Mark Waugh was taken to hospital with stomach pains. He'll remain under observation for 24 hours. Meanwhile, seam bowler Paul Rifle is flying to England to reinforce the tourists' injury-hit squad. England's footballers have beaten France 1-0 in Montpellier in their second match of the tournoi. After Wednesday's win against Italy, England topped the four-nation competition with 6 points out of 6. Their goal tonight came late in the game from Alan Shearer.
Another tough test for England's side, buoyed by 2 wins in a week. The hosts of next year's World Cup finals had lost only one of their last 34 games. And David Seaman soon discovered the threat their strike force poses, eventually clasping Dugarry's header before it reached the line. England, given far less time on the ball than they were by Italy, struggled to produce attacks of note. But Shearer and Wright did combine well after 40 minutes, Barthez denying the Arsenal striker his second goal of the tournament. After a first half that had failed to live up to its billing, both sides tried to raise the pace after the break, and Dugarry's volley came close to troubling Seaman. Minutes later, the England keeper was called upon, but Legler's left-foot volley was successfully turned away from danger. It was a late introduction of Teddy Sheringham that finally broke the deadlock. No surprise about the man he set up for the winner. Shearer's goal after Barthez's fumble could well be enough to bring England some rare silverware. James Pearce, BBC News.
Rugby Union and the British Lions have been beaten for the first time on their current tour of South Africa. They lost by 35 points to 30 against Northern Transvaal in Pretoria. The home side opened up an early 11-0 lead with the first try of the match after 18 minutes, a solo effort from Casper Stein, who also kicked 15 points. Later came a Lions fight back. They got to within 5 points of their hosts with this, the second of 2 tries from Jeremy Gaskett. But an error by Scottish fly half Gregor Townsend allowed Danny van Skolkwyk in for his second try of the match to seal victory for Northern Transvaal. Meanwhile, in Buenos Aires, England have been defeated 33-13 in the second test against Argentina. The handling error handed Facundo Soler the first of his 2 tries after 31 minutes. The Pumas went further ahead in the second half before England debutant Alex King restored some pride in the final 10 minutes. The match, however, ended with Argentina on top and the Test series drawn 1-1. Tennis, and Croatia's Eva Maioli was the surprise straight sets winner of today's singles final at the French Open in Paris. She beat the world number 1, Martina Hingis of Switzerland, 6-4, 6-2. Maioli served for the match after almost an hour and 20 minutes. This final rally was to complete Hingis' first defeat this year and bring to an end a sequence of 40 successive victories. For Maioli, it was her first Grand Slam title from her first final. The French Open has never been won before in the new Open era by a player seeded as low as 9th. And finally, Leeds have become the latest British Rugby League side to be beaten by an Australian team in the World Club Championship. They lost in North Queensland by 42 points to 20. Michael.
And the main news again, the government's to make so-called sleaze a crime. A new offence of corruption in public life will merit up to 7 years in jail. That's all from the BBC Newsroom tonight. From Rob and from me, good night.
John Humphreys puts former Chancellor and Tory leader candidate Kenneth Clarke on the record tomorrow at midday here on BBC One.
Hello, good evening. We're keeping an eye on a new area of thunderstorms that are moving up from France. These could well clip East Sussex, Kent, Essex and perhaps even East Norfolk over the next hour or two before moving away into the North Sea. And then really for many places tonight it will be fine, but we'll still see further showers moving their way northwards up through the Irish Sea and into southwest Scotland by tomorrow morning. Now, not a cold night by any means, the low 14 to 16 degrees. Still fairly strong southerly winds as well, but we will see those winds easing on Sunday as its next frontal system pushes into the northwest, merging the showers. But to start with on Sunday, many places seeing a lot of sunshine, fine through central and eastern areas. The cloud bubbling up though to give some showers. In the west, the showers I think just around the coast to start with before they really get going through the afternoon. Perhaps even merging to give some longer spells of rain across the north and west with the odd rumble of thunder. Here temperatures around 20 degrees, but inland a warm 23 Celsius. And I think in the afternoon at Edgbaston, around about a 40% chance of showers. Good evening.
May the 1st, the day the party died.
Terrible night for the Conservatives.
You don't need a magnifying glass to see the cracks in the party. They are festering. Little worms are coming out of them.
You cannot really get by with short-term leadership, and that's the kind that we've had ever since Margaret left Downing Street.
We were remarkably stupid. There were a section of our party who wanted to lose.
The decline and fall of the Conservative Party, but as they search for a new leader, are they just yesterday's men? Panorama, Monday, 10 o'clock, BBC One. That's all, folks.
Next Monday, a comedy-flavour TV dinner from the BBC at 8:30 on BBC One.
Hello, David.
The Peter Principle.
How are things up at head office?
One way to reduce the risk of heart attack is to take regular exercise.
Don't tell him.
Then on BBC Two at 9.
Anybody in favour of letting the morons from TV land into our church?
The Vicar of Dibley.
You always think people at the BBC are going to be glamorous, and then you remember Nicholas Witchell works there.
And back on One at 9:30, Birds of a Feather.
I don't know, we had any tuna. There's a tin started in the fridge. That's not tuna, that's luxury cat food.
A belly full of laughs next Monday from 8:30. Too much comedy for just one channel.
Gary Barlow, Gina G and Eternal, all top of the pops at midnight. Top of the pecking order now on BBC One, womanising Eddie Murphy meets his match. Comedy in our film Boomerang.